Good morning, folks. My name is Jody Rao. I use she, her pronouns. I am a manager here with the Coalition on Homelessness. Hopefully you are here for the Working Families Tax Credit Training brought to you in partnership with Statewide Poverty Action Network and Solid Ground's Benefits Legal Assistance Program. We've got Marcy Bowers and Hannah Rosenberger here, who I'm going to pass the floor to here in a moment. But this training is part of kind of what we're calling our special series of public benefits are key. And this is something that the coalition has a long history of doing trainings on, helping folks, case managers, peers, learn the ins and outs of how to access those benefits that really give people cash assistance, sometimes access to housing, food benefits, Medicare, Medicaid, so the ABD, the HEN, the TANF, Work First, Medicare, Medicaid, all those programs that really help try to support people and lift people out of poverty. So we try to do those trainings because we want you to have access to the best knowledge, the best information, so that you can really help folks that need these benefits and make this work easier for you, and people can get these benefits easier. This is also something that the Coalition on Homelessness, Statewide Poverty Action, Solid Ground, and others have worked on for years and years to make these programs stronger, improve them, more accessible, better resources. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today, both as part of the training and how this new tax credit, and it does say Working Families Tax Credit, but depending on eligibility, individuals may also qualify for this tax credit. We're going to talk about how advocacy around this stuff and us coming together has really brought a lot of these benefits and these resources to bear for folks in a better way and more accessible. So all that to say, if you are not super familiar with the Coalition on Homelessness, we are a coalition. So we have 50 plus member organizations that represent homeless service providers, housing providers, human service providers, kind of spans the gamut of many organizations, some very small, some very large. And we do a lot of advocacy and work on policy issues that affect folks that are experiencing homelessness, housing instability. We work on anti-poverty measures. Solid Ground and Poverty Action Network here today are key partners in that work for us. So we are super excited to bring this to you. So we host regular membership meetings every month, third Thursday of the month from 9 to 10:30. We host regular trainings. This is our second already this year. We've got another one coming up around really long-term care and homelessness and the rights that folks have around that. So we're going to drop the link into that. That's coming up next month. Tomorrow is our general membership meeting. So we would love to have you join there. We're going to have Seattle Housing Authority here to talk about the Family Unification Program and foster youth independence programs and some housing vouchers that they want to talk about. We are going to dive deep into where we are in the legislature and everything that's happening around that, because we're working hard on ABD and HEN, among other things. We're going to share some actions for you all today around all this, where you can strengthen all this good advocacy work. And then lastly, if you are not signed up for our emails, which hopefully you are, we'll get you so you can sign up for our email listserv, where you can get notifications for all this stuff coming in and all this good stuff. So on that note, I am really happy to introduce Marcy Bowers from Statewide Poverty Action Network and Hannah Rosenberger from Solid Ground. So I will pass it off to you two.
Great. Thank you so much, Jody. Hi, everyone. So nice to see you. We're going to be sharing our slides in just a minute, but I'll just start with an introduction. So like Jody said, my name is Hannah Rosenberger. I'm the program manager with Benefits Legal Assistance Program. We're part of Solid Ground. We provide free legal services to low-income individuals and families in King County who are dealing with public benefit issues. And I'm joined here with Marcy Bowers of the Statewide Poverty Action Network. So I'm going to give us a brief overview of the agenda for today, and then we'll dive right into the content. Just a minute here while we are presenting. All right. So this is what we're going to be covering today. It's a lot of information, but I do want to say we will have a pause halfway through for questions. So if you have questions that are coming up, feel free to put them in the chat. Our friends at the coalition are going to be monitoring that and pulling those questions for us. We have a large section of frequently asked questions at the end, and then also we'll have time for additional questions. So we're going to first dive into the background and the context, who this coalition is that was able to fight for this working families tax credit, some background on how that came to be. Then we'll talk about the actual eligibility of the program, kind of the nuts and bolts, the application itself, and then we'll have that frequently asked questions and additional time for questions. So just again, we will have a spot for questions halfway through, but definitely feel free to put those in the chat as they come up. And with that, I'll hand it over to Marcy to get us started.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, everyone. My name is Marcy Bowers, she, her pronouns. I'm the executive director of the Statewide Poverty Action Network, and I am so excited about this training. I have to tell you, I have seen a few familiar faces, but this was a 15-year effort that has come to fruition. And I have to tell you, I have been involved in it for all 15 years. So it's very rare to really dedicate almost your entire career to a project and really see it come to fruition. And I think it's such a treat. So my hope is that I can get you all as excited about this tax credit as I am. My hope is that my enthusiasm will be a little bit contagious, not like the colds that all of our children and coworkers and everyone else are passing along, but that really you all have a better sense of what this is, why it's important, how we got here. My hope is that you'll know how to get folks signed up for it, but also that you'll have a good sense of why the advocacy on this kind of stuff is important, and hopefully will leave you wanting more. And I wouldn't be me and I wouldn't do this work if I didn't also have many advocacy action items that Jody will put in the chat for you throughout the presentation to keep us going on, hey, this is great, but you know what? There's more. There's always more to do. So without further ado, I'm going to jump in. I am counting on someone to tell me if screen sharing goes awry. I think we all probably have a love-hate relationship with Zoom at this point. And I have a complicated relationship with Zoom, especially with screen sharing. So somebody's got to tell me if something goes sideways because I probably won't know.
I got your back, Marcy.
Okay, thank you, Jody. Okay, see, like this. No, I want to go forward. Okay, here we go. Okay, so who is the Working Families Tax Credit Coalition? It's pretty much like what you think of for advocacy coalitions, large, broad-based group of organizations. There's a little over 50 of us. We work on economic justice, racial justice.
Marcy, you just went on mute.
It's funny, it said you muted me, Jody.
I was admitting someone. Maybe I accidentally hit mute. Sorry about that, folks.
See, complicated relationships. Here we are, demonstrating it in minute one. So immigrant rights advocates, labor unions, direct service providers, domestic violence advocates, many, many more. And I think that's important, partly for the kind of strategy of advocacy, but I think it also shows up in how the credit took shape. That you see those the priorities of those organizations and their constituents really show up in how we shaped the tax credit over the years. Okay, so here's a little, some little logos for everybody to see. There's some organizations, but really the goal is working together to make sure that communities most impacted by our really messy upside down tax code, receive cash. So membership in the coalition was free. It's open to any organization who really shares that goal. I will flag for me personally and professionally, part of how Poverty Action does our policy setting work as we travel around the state and do listening sessions, hear from folks about what they want us to work on, what they should be working on. And, you know, within the top 3 things, probably the top thing we hear is people just need access to money. People need more money. The second thing we hear is things are too expensive, which is, you know, adjacent to people just need more money. And then the third thing that I think is related here, but often takes people by surprise when I tell them this, is the third thing that we hear most frequently is that people feel treated badly by the systems that are meant to serve them. We hear a lot about how many hoops people have to jump through to access critical benefits. This is not me saying benefits are not key. This is me saying that they are incredibly important. And so people will force themselves to jump through many, many hoops, but they don't like it. They feel mistrusted. They feel treated badly, and they really wish we had a different way. So part of how we rallied around the idea of a tax credit is tax credits don't impact other public benefits typically, and their application processes are significantly simpler. There is not a work requirement in the same way. There's not required mid-year recertifications. There are not a requirement that you meet with a case manager. You don't necessarily have to divulge all of your life circumstances in order to access this credit. I don't want to tell you this is perfect. I will never tell you that really about anything. But I do want to say that that was one of the really key goals for this, and really came from what we hear from community members who are most impacted by this work, is that they wanted something that would give them cash, and they wanted it to be a little bit simpler and a way to apply with a little more dignity and respect for their lives and their experiences. Okay, so it says over a decade. I'm going to be real. It took 13 years. Okay. It was 13 years. The first time this bill passed was in 2008, and then it went unfunded for many, many years. And then we came back together in the 2018 time zone roughly and said, we want to do this. Again, we think the time is right. And we worked together. And I think we made some really key improvements upon the bill that was passed in 2008, as well as got it fully funded. So we'll talk through all of that, but I just want to be super clear. Like this took a long time. I have fewer wrinkles and a whole lot less gray hair in that 2008 bill signing photo. I'll just say it that way. Okay, so over those 13 years, there was a ton of work that came together. So these are just a few pictures of people testifying. There will be some rallies. This is the bill signing down here. We were thrilled in 2021 to have an in-person bill signing. It was one of the few in-person bill signings, but I think that really sort of signals how important this was. Up on the right is Representative Meelan Tai, who's been our prime sponsor and amazing champion on this. And I really think her amazing leadership is part of how we got the bill that we got, with the strong immigrant rights components attached to that. She's, one of the few refugees in our legislature, or maybe the only, certainly the first. And I think her experience there really helped bolster us, and we were able to keep her bolstered as well throughout the process. So it was a big effort. With a big win. This was right before COVID. This is probably one of the last big in-person rallies. But the original version of this bill that we introduced, we were expecting potentially 1 million people in Washington to be able to qualify. What we ended up with was something slightly smaller in terms of number of people. We're expecting about 425,000 people to be eligible, but probably a more robust credit than what we had originally been thinking. So you see these kind of one of 1 million, and that would have been that was the pre-COVID iteration of the bill. But it is sort of funny to look at this and think I think about 3 weeks after this, the state shut down and we didn't do any in-person things at all. So It's fun to look back at these photos from a totally different time. Okay, so what is it? So now I've told you all this background. I've said it took a really long time, but I haven't actually told you what it is. So it is a new state tax credit for low to moderate income Washingtonians. The ranges, that is a typo, that should that should say from $300 to $1,200. Actually, that's not true. That is not a typo. There is a phase out where people could come down to 50. It's a little complicated. We'll dig into that in a few minutes. The vast majority of people who will access the credit will be in the $300 to $1,200 range. So we can talk about that 50 a little bit later as needed. But starting on February 1st, so exactly 2 weeks ago, a little over 400,000, about 425,000 Washington households will be eligible. It's based on income and family size. Again, more details to come. You know, this really is basically a state version of the earned income tax credit. So, but we are not a state with an income tax, as I think all of you know. So, you know, this is sort of it's an interesting sort of conundrum about how do you do an earned income tax credit in a state without an income tax? And at some point in the process, we realized that we didn't have to be bound by the federal earned income tax credit model in the same way that other states did, because we were looking at a different tax code altogether. So that was one of the big changes we made kind of in the 2018 to 2021 timeframe, was really restructured what this looks like. But it's ultimately, it's a direct cash payment. So they don't just reduce your tax rate, they put money back into people's pockets. You don't have to pay it back. You don't have to use it for any specific purpose. You don't have to report how you used it. And it's free and safe to apply. So, but really, I think if you're trying to think of like, what would we compare this to? Really, it's similar to the federal earned income tax credit, or EITC, and similar to 2021's child tax credit in that it's a tax credit. This is not a new TANF. This is not a new ABD. This is not those sort of things. It's a tax credit. So a big impact for kids. Like I don't think I have to sell anyone here on the idea that kids do better when their families can meet their basic needs, right? It's like shows up in education, like metrics like math and reading, shows up in graduation rates. It shows up in things as seemingly separate, like higher birth weights for pregnant moms. So you see the biggest impact in the lowest income families, which I think is probably, again, not surprising to anyone in this training, but I do think it's sort of important to recognize that the size of the benefit, but also one of the ways that we changed the benefit from the federal program. The federal program has a phase-in rate. So you have to earn a little bit more, you kind of earn a little bit more, and then you can access the full credit. And the Washington version is you get the full credit if you earn $1. So we eliminated that phase-in, partly with the recognition. Again, we'll talk about this in a minute, but part of that is with the recognition that the benefit is strongest, and our value of racial equity and economic justice was we need to give the full benefit to the people earning the least. We shouldn't be sort of phasing it in and saying, if you earn a little more, you can get a little more. We need to give the full benefit to the people at the lowest incomes level. Okay, so here we go. A little more of that racial justice component. There's more of an impact for low-income communities of color and immigrant communities. So communities of color, families of color, Black, Indigenous, other people of color make up 36% of eligible households in Washington, while only making up 25% of the population. So really trying to have an outsized impact in communities of color. And mixed status households, there's, really kind of trying to think about, this was that piece for us around as a coalition, like how do we make sure that we're really meeting our values, and how do we learn from immigrant organizations? How do we learn from organizations that are located and situated and led by like Black community members, how do we make sure that this is a credit that works well for them and has an outsized impact, given that our systems have a historically outsized racist impact on their families and their communities. So really trying to, this will not single-handedly right those wrongs, but it's a step and an important one. Okay, so I think you all probably know this at this point. Again, this will not single-handedly fix our tax code, but it takes a really important step in the right direction. And I think it'll be interesting to look at what our tax code looks like as this is in effect for a few years. So currently the richest 1% pay around 3% of their incomes in state and local taxes, while the lowest income 20% pay around 18% of their income in state and local taxes. And this is largely because we don't have an income tax. We have high property taxes and we have high sales taxes. So what you pay in state and local taxes, like the tax on toothpaste is the same for me and it's the same for Bill Gates. And it's the same for a low income household, right? And so as a percent of my income or as a percent of a low income person's income, it's much higher, right? Okay, again, I feel like I'm preaching to a choir here, but I do feel like it's important context for everyone to have that we're attempting to start fixing a lot of things with a tax credit, and we're not going to get everywhere with it, but you can see how there's kind of something to like, something for everyone to like in this credit. Okay, more things for people to like. Rural legislators are like, wow, this has an outsized impact in rural communities as well. So King and Pierce County might have the highest impact by the numbers of people who are eligible, but by percent, it's rural communities. There's a lot of low-income folks as a percentage of the population in those communities. So it's honestly, like I thought about this a lot, it's not very often that you have a policy that both has an outsized impact in low-income rural communities and in low-income urban communities. That's actually like sort of a difficult middle ground to find, and there's not that many things that do it. So super exciting. And again, I'm painting this like this is like the miracle, like cure-all, and it's not, but I do think it's, I told you I was going to be excited about this, but I do think it's really important. Okay, so that's what it is. Now, hopefully you're all like super excited about what it is and why it's so important, and everybody wants to know about it. So I'm going to actually kick it over to Hannah, who's the expert on all things eligibility in my experience, and let her talk through the overview of eligibility.
Great. You're overselling me. No, but I am happy to talk about this next section. We're going to talk about, exactly how to figure out if you or community members are eligible, and then how do you actually apply? Like, how do you get this? You can go to the next slide. So what I should say is, I think Marcy already covered this, but the credit is alive now. So it is for the tax year 2022, and people are doing their taxes in 2023 for last year. So it's alive and kicking, and people can apply for it, today. So the first eligibility kind of requirement is that there's a residency piece. So that means that you or your community members have to have lived in Washington for more than 183 days in the tax year that you're applying for. So that would be in 2022. 180 days, kind of a random number, but it's actually 6 months. So it's not necessarily, 183 days in a row. Or Marcy, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's just like a total of 6 months throughout the year. The second piece is you will have to have filed a tax return in order to apply. So that is a big piece, especially for people whose incomes are low, that they aren't normally filing taxes, but they do have to file a federal tax return in order to then be able to apply and be eligible for this program. There is an age requirement with some caveats, of course. If you have children or you're going to be applying, claiming a child on your tax credit, you can be any age. If you don't have children, then you have to be between the ages of 25 and 65. So this is when Marcy at the beginning mentioned, we call it a family, working families tax credit, but it doesn't necessarily mean you have to have children in order to be a family. But then there is that age range you have to fall between. We will talk about what a qualifying child means in a later slide. And then, yes, one more piece here is you do have to have earned at least $1 of income in the tax year that you're applying for. So again, we're thinking about 2022 for people that are applying for today. So there are things that do and don't count as income. Things like child support or Social Security benefits would not count as income, but gig economy work does count as income. So a delivery driver, freelance, that is going to count as your $1 of income. And then there are some income limits. This is the slide depending on your filing status. So just a note, this will change slightly every year. So this may look different in 2023, but these are the numbers that we're working with for this year. So you can see, the number of children or relatives claimed versus filing status, filing married, filing jointly, filing a single, and then what that maximum credit could be. We can go to the next slide. So a big question, of course, is, well, how much can the household receive? The actual amount that you receive, it is based on your income level. And then if the number of children you're claiming, or if you're not claiming any children. So you can see the maximum credit is going to range between $300 to $1,200. As Marcy mentioned, there could be a minimum payment of $50. And if there's any specific questions about that, Marcy can answer those in our Q&A section. But for the most part, we're looking between $300 to $1,200 maximum. And then next slide. So the Department of Revenue, the Washington State Department of Revenue, they actually have an eligibility checker on their website. It's available in English and Spanish. And it will actually walk through step by step, it asks questions, you fill in the information, and then it'll kind of spit out a result, whether you or the community members are eligible. And actually, we're going to be referencing the Department of Revenue's website a lot because they have a whole section about the working families tax credit. So that's another good resource that you can check out. And that website is workingfamiliescredit.wa.gov. And I'll make sure to put all that in the chat. Right, next slide. At this point, I'll pass it over to Marcy to talk about the I-10 filers and how they can apply and what that process is.
Okay, so this is one of the things that is super special about our credit. We are the first state in the country. Well, we were the first state in the country to do an earned income tax credit without an income tax. So that was something that was pretty cool that we did. But we were also the first state to include I-10 filers from the get-go. So many other states that had state earned income tax credits needed to go back in at some point and add I-10 filers to that. So before I get too carried away, what is an I-10 filer? For those of you who don't spend a lot of time thinking about taxes, I will say this was not necessarily a familiar acronym for me before I started working on tax code issues. So it's people who file taxes without a Social Security number, and they can still qualify for the credit. So who files with an I-10? So it basically allows people to file taxes without a Social Security number. So for the vast majority of I-10 filers are undocumented immigrants or certain student visa holders, or some spouses and children, but this is also unique in that it also includes some survivors of domestic violence who, for privacy reasons and confidentiality, don't use their Social Security number when wanting to file taxes. So this was something, again, where the coalition really came together and said, this is our bottom line. We are not negotiating this away. The legislature has to come up with a strategy to do this, and we're going to do it from the get-go. We will pull our support from the bill if this group of people is removed. So it was just it was non-negotiable for us. So super exciting, but it does mean that there's a little bit of an extra process step for folks with an ITIN filer. So okay, so part of the other reason this is important is many people who file with an ITIN are excluded from other supports. So I think there's a bill right now in Olympia about creating an unemployment insurance option for undocumented immigrants. Currently, you have to, it's based on your social security number. And so undocumented immigrants are not eligible to receive that. So that would be an example of where people are excluded, but they were also excluded in some federal tax credits as well, like the child tax credit. So all of those annual payments that went out were not available to ITIN filers. But the numbers here that there's a little over 33,000 ITIN filers in Washington who will be eligible for the credit. So this is a really big deal. But it is, so the ITIN file, I think it's on my next slide. Oh, no, it's not on my next slide. Okay, so let me actually back up and say, so a person needs to file for an ITIN with the IRS and apply for an ITIN there. I want to be honest, the IRS would love to give people ITINs. They're like, because the express purpose of getting an ITIN is to pay your taxes, right? So the IRS is like, great, we want to do this, but the IRS is not known for its speedy processing times. I will say they're not known for their call center wait time expediency. So this is, we'll talk about this a little bit in the future. This is something to kind of pay attention to if you're supporting folks in signing people up, is that they do need to have an ITIN. If they have not filed for an ITIN, they still can apply for the credit, but they need to be applying for the ITIN. Interestingly, on the federal system, you can apply for the ITIN and file your taxes, not exactly at the same time, but again, the IRS wants you to pay your taxes. So the IRS, sort of offers like a provisional approval and lets you file your taxes that way. DOR is basically saying we need to have the full ITIN in order to give you the actual cash in hand, but we will accept your application even if you're in process of receiving your ITIN. Once you have applied for your ITIN with the IRS, you can apply for the working families tax credit, but you won't actually get the money until your ITIN is approved by the IRS. We can dig into that a little bit more, but I just want to kind of get that out there, that this is a really big deal that it's included, but it does add an extra layer for those who would apply with an ITIN. Hannah, I think I'm kicking it back over to you for process.
Yes. Okay. So, now we're going to dig into, we talked about the history, the context, eligibility. Now we're going to talk about how you actually apply for it. So what will you need? This is kind of your handy checklist. The first is, I mentioned one of the eligibility pieces is you have to have filed your taxes. Now we will talk about how you can perhaps do them simultaneously, but just know you would need your tax return, social security card number or I-10 number, or again, the application that Marcy was mentioning, and then optional, government issued photo ID. So this was another really important, if I may speak on behalf of a coalition I wasn't too involved in, but this was also a really important advocacy piece to not, I think we all, again, preaching to the choir, know the barriers that requiring, government photo ID can mean to people in all sorts of situations. And so this was also a really important piece to not have that be a requirement, to get pull out that additional barrier. So people shouldn't necessarily, if they're applying in person, or nobody should be asking them to scan a copy of their driver's license and, attach it to the application, anything like that. Okay, so next slide. Okay, so a lot of people, excuse me, who do their taxes, they may use a paid site like H&R Block or TurboTax. However, something I really want to shout from the rooftop is if somebody's going to be eligible for this, the Working Families Tax Credit, they're also going to be eligible for free tax help and free tax prep help. So we really want to encourage people to utilize these free services, because if somebody does use a paid service, a chunk of their credit might end up going to pay for that paid service anyway. So again, the goal is, more cash in people's pockets. So there are many free sites across Washington state where community members can get the support. The in-person sites, they're called VITA, or maybe VITA, but it stands for Volunteer Income Tax Assistance programs. So there is a couple websites where you can find this tool. The IRS has a lookup tool. You can go to wataxcredit.org, freetaxexperts.org, another website where you can find these sites. And then a lot of public local libraries, for example, will be a site where they'll have these free tax prep. So that's another a resource that you can check out to find these sites. If people are using a paid prep service, community members, they should ask about the Working Family Tax Credit, since not all paid services will have it integrated in their system. So for example, we know that this year TurboTax is one of the paid services that is not going to incorporate the application in the regular, step-by-step way to do your taxes. TurboTax, it will have a little pop-up that will direct people to the Department of Revenue's website, but it's not going to be integrated. Now, the Department of Revenue, they do have a list on their website of paid service providers that will have this application integrated. It's a big list, so I won't go over it now, but I'll just say if people are want to use that paid service, check out the Department of Revenue's website for the Working Family Tax Credit, and there will be a list there. And again, if somebody's eligible for the Earned Income Tax Credit, the EITC that Marcy mentioned, they're also going to be eligible for this Working Family Tax Credit, except for the I-10 followers, which are unfortunately excluded from that tax credit. Yes, I think we can go to the next page. Okay, so if you are using a paid tax prep service that integrates the application, you'll be able to just do it all at the same time. But for people who miss out on the Working Families Tax Credit when they did their taxes, or maybe they used TurboTax so they missed it, or people who are doing their own taxes, you can actually apply for the tax credit separately from doing your taxes. You can do it online through the Department of Revenue's portal. Applicants will need to make a Secure Access Washington account. That means there's a you need to have an email address, a password, the ability to then check your email to be able to, verify your information. This is available in only English and Spanish, so unfortunately that's a little limited. People can also apply in person. There's a paper application, so they can get that in person at Department of Revenue field offices, or you can download and print it from the website and then fill it out that way. So the paper application is available in 12 languages. So there's a little bit more language access if you do the paper application. And again, workingfamiliescredit.wa.gov, that is where you can find the application, find field offices for the Department of Revenue, get information about how to apply online. So that's a good website to check out. Okay, I think we can go to the next page. Yes, so language access. As I mentioned, the online application is available in English and Spanish. The call center, there's this 360 number. There's help available in English, Spanish, and Vietnamese. So, as you're being prompted what language that you can speak, the call center will provide language services. It's English, Spanish, and Vietnamese. But there's over 300 languages that are available with interpreter support. So if you need a different language, you can still call that number and say what language you need, and they will have an interpreter can get on the line there. So if you have any questions about how to find the application, how to fill it out, where to go, then this is a good number to call. All right, next slide, not application. So again, these are the languages that the paper application are going to be available in. So a little bit more extensive than the online application, but of course it doesn't include every single language that people are going to need it in. Next slide. And then if you want to request materials, so maybe flyers or posters, printed applications for yourself or for your community members, you can request that directly from the Department of Revenue. This is just a sample of kind of what a flyer might look like. So that's a way if you want to get some printed materials for your community members, you can go to that website. And then the next slide. Okay, so this is a bit of a summary slide, but just to go over the steps about how you actually apply for this tax credit. Number one is, of course, you have to file for your federal taxes. When you do that, you get your copy of your 1040, that's just the name of the form, that's your tax return. And again, you want to make sure that you save a copy, because if you are not using one of those paid services that integrated it, you are going to have to file that separate application, and you're going to need to prove that you filed your tax return. So that's why you want to make sure to save a copy of your tax return. And then you fill out the actual application. We are going to show the paper application, and Marcy will go through what that actually looks like. And again, these are 3 ways to actually apply for the tax credit. You can do it in person. This is where the VITA sites, you can get help applying for your taxes and the tax credit. You can do it online, or you can get that paper application. Hopefully that's clear enough. I know it's a little confusing, like you can do it together or you could do it separately. So we're trying to reiterate the information. And people will get a copy of these slides so you can go back through. And of course, we'll be available for questions. There's the call number. And then a key message, it's in bold, it's in red. We really want to make sure people get this message. When folks are filling out their taxes, they should be thinking about and asking about the working tax credit, but also people will have until December 31st of every year to apply for and receive the working taxes credit. So maybe people have already, they were on the ball, they filled out their taxes already and they didn't know, they didn't apply for this. It's okay. They can still fill out the separate application for the tax credit, and they have until the 31st to fill it out and then to actually receive that cash in their pockets. I think the next slide might go back to Marcy, but let me I'll stick on this page. Just again, more resources about the coalition, the Department of Revenue, where you can get free tax prep, how you can do your taxes online for free. Just a lot of resources to help people that file their taxes for free, but then also be able to fill out this application to get this tax credit. I think the next question might be next slide is our questions. So we promised we would take a breather and ask questions. So I'll pass it over to Jody to see if we have any in the chat.
We had one pop up in the chat that sounds like you answered it as it was being typed, but I missed the answer. I always think other people sometimes, probably have similar questions. So for the good of the group, I'm going to ask it again. Are individuals who are over the age of 65 but are still working eligible for the tax credit?
I can take this one. Unfortunately, they are not. There is a bill moving through the legislature this session. I will put an action link in the chat at some point when I stop sharing slides so that you don't have to see me combing through my stuff to find it easily. But there is a bill to extend the age range. So basically lowering it at the bottom end to say 18, and basically to say 18 and over. Because we do know that there are seniors over the age of 65 that are still working. but unfortunately they are not currently eligible. One of the things that did not change in the original bill was how this matched up with the federal EITC age range. So that is the federal EITC age range. That is what we ended up with here in Washington as well. So for the 2022 tax year, you are not eligible if you're over 65 and working. However, hopefully by next year, assuming that this bill can make it through the legislature and we can add an early implementation date on it, hopefully by next year that will change. So stay tuned and I'll give you an action to take to make that a reality as well.
Thank you, Marcy. And I think I just threw it into the chat. So take a look and make sure that's the same one you're looking at. To expand the working tax
rate.
You.
Oh my gosh. Jody, thank you for doing digging. I failed to like adequately understand how the screen share would impact my ability to look for anything.
It is impactful, and you're being successful, I think, for several of us in terms of your enthusiasm and excitement around this and the advocacy being infectious. So I have not seen any other questions coming through the chat, so I want us to take a moment to talk a little bit more. I mean, Marcy did an incredible job of talking about why it's so important to dedicate years upon years to advocacy around creating policy that rights wrongs and fights for economic justice. So we're going to take a moment here, since we've got a little time, and maybe as questions are forming, people are typing, thinking, or a comment as you're on the verge of it, we're going to share some more action alerts. So one of the main bills that the Coalition on Homelessness is really working on is House Bill 1260. This is sponsored by Representative Emily Alvarado, and this is really working on improving the Age Blind and Disabled, or the ABD program, so that folks don't have to pay back the state when they get approved for Social Security. So I'm going to share a link so that you can contact your lawmakers around that and a little information, while I see Allison, who has her hand raised, take the floor.
Oh, thank you, Jody. Thank you, Marcy and Hannah. I am inspired listening to you, and I thought I knew why this was an exciting benefit. In listening to you, I just thought I would chime in here because there are 62 people who have joined this morning. And I know from watching folks log in and seeing the registration beforehand, you all who are joining us this morning are doing direct services, helping people who are youth, families with minor children, people who are survivors of gender-based violence, folks who are currently living unsheltered, people who have housing and are trying to hold on to it, an incredible range of types of people and organizations who are going to help get the word out. But I realize that sometimes we just take for granted that people know how to take action when we drop one of those action alert links in the chat. And especially because the reason that we, the Coalition on Homelessness, are reaching out to all these direct service providers to invite you to join us for this is that most of you spend most of your time helping people meet their basic needs. And you may not be as familiar or comfortable with the legislative advocacy piece of this. I think it's worth just taking a moment to say these templates that Marcy and Hannah and Jody have created and are sharing are designed to be super easy to use. If you've never done it before, what happens is that you click the link and you're just asked to put your name, your home address, so that it goes to your lawmakers. And then you get a chance to customize the message. And I just took the action from Poverty Action Right Now to expand this amazing Working Families Tax Credit. And all I did was I rewrote the subject line of the email. It was a perfectly fine subject line, but I wanted the recipients, my state representatives and my state senator, to know that I am actually a real person who lives in their district and I really care about this issue. So I just changed the subject line to say, please expand the working families tax credit. And, you know, with 60 people on this call, I'm going to leave off the presenters. That means that we have the potential to reach 180 lawmakers, or to rather, a better way to say it is to send 180 messages just in a few minutes right now this morning. And this week is the cutoff for policy bills. So we timed this workshop brilliantly because we have the ability to strengthen this particular benefit by letting lawmakers know that there are 60 people who care enough to send them emails about this as a priority while they're thinking about hundreds of other bills. So that's just my little pitch to you. Even if your specialty isn't talking to elected officials, they still need to hear from you. And if you're excited about this benefit, you heard from Marcy how much work it took to create it. And what we can do right now is build on that and expand it. And that to me is also really exciting because it means all the folks who signed up to come today, you get to do the work of spreading the word about this benefit and making sure people use it, but also you get to be part of helping to keep changing public policy just by taking action and squeezing that few minutes into your day. So that's my just little pitch.
Thanks, Allison.
Love it. I love it. Always organizing, Allison. I love it. I will note that the ABD bill that Jody mentioned is in appropriation, has an appropriations hearing today. So that is another extreme. All of these are timely actions, but that is also a very timely action to take today because legislators are considering it today.
Great. And we do have one question coming in. But Sarah, I saw you come off mute and I want you, it sounds like you're going to tag on there.
I was just going to say our particular action alert is targeted at the members of the Appropriations Committee. So, you know, don't be discouraged if it says, you know, you're not eligible to take this because your particular lawmaker is not part of that committee. But if your lawmaker is on that committee, it's a super important message, as they will be, as Marcy said, they will be hearing that bill this afternoon, and it needs some support.
Thanks. So in the chat, I'm a new case manager and I have number of clients who are living in tiny house villages and some of them don't work. I'm asking, how can I tell them to apply if they are eligible?
So, you know, I think it is hard if they don't work. What I will say is that, you know, again, as Hannah mentioned, there's, this does count for kind of freelance work or gig economy work. You know, one example that's come up in my world recently, and maybe in some of your worlds as well, is I think there's been a really positive trend in sort of compensation opportunities for people who provide their lived experience, expertise in organizations, to state agencies, to the King County Regional Homeless Authority, right? There's been more of a trend recently in compensating people who share their experiences. And, you know, I'll just say for Poverty Action, we provide the option of, would you like to have a gift card that doesn't count against your benefits, or would you like to have a check that could enable you to access the Earned Income Tax Credit or the Working Families Tax Credit? We'll talk about that a little bit more. It's one of the FAQs. But so, you know, those sort of paid opportunities, if you get paid with a check or with cash in those circumstances, you could, like a person could do that. Unfortunately, you do have to have $1 of official income to apply, something that you could tell the IRS about. So because of the requirement to file taxes. Again, there is an FAQ about kind of filing for taxes that when we did the review, Jody said specifically, I want you to dig into this because it's confusing. So I'll take that slide and I'll dig into it a little bit more, but unfortunately you do have to have at least $1 of income. I do think one of the future advocacy opportunities, and we want to be really thoughtful about this to avoid any unintended consequences, but really looking at like how could we look at things like disability benefits as a source of income to be able to qualify for the working families tax credit. We want to be thoughtful because we don't want to sort of inadvertently open up other sort of things that could happen to disability benefits by making them considered taxable income for this, because we don't want them to be taxable income. But I do think there's some kind of future advocacy and future expansions. At a later date in a different training, you and I can have an hours-long conversation about all the ways that we should expand the working families tax credit. I've got lots of ideas, and I'm sure you do too. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for future advocacy on this. I think there's always opportunity for advocacy, let's be honest. But I do think there are ways to kind of think about how do we expand this in the future. But unfortunately, you have to have $1 of income to qualify.
Great. Okay. Thank you for all the work you have done and continue to do. As a federal office, we are not as directly involved with local or state legislation, but please feel free to reach out to our office. However, we can connect in tandem with federal law or agencies. Specifically, my constituents having issues with IRS, we are happy to assist with casework inquiry. So that's coming from Corey with a email link there. So thank you, Corey, for sharing that. I think we're doing pretty well on time. So I want to just pause one sec before we really move into the second part of the training, where we're gonna, I think, look at an application, and there's a really frequently asked question. So we'll really kind of dig into some of the key things that come up again and again for folks, or could come up again and again. But since we're in this sort of place with not a lot of questions at this point, but we have a lot of advocacy and we're talking a lot about that, you can also ask about that, or a little bit more about some of those advocacy actions that we've dropped those links in. So I shared the ABD improvement, that's the Appropriations Committee this afternoon, expanding the temporary assistance for needy families. So really helping families get basic needs met, expanding dental therapy and rent stabilization. So if there are other questions about either these specific actions that we're doing, advocacy in general, we won't go too far off topic, but we've got time, so let's take advantage of it. Oh, somebody did all of theirs. Thank you. Thank you. And I'm going to make another plug for our post-training survey. We love folks to also tell us how these trainings are going for them so we can improve them, bring you what you need in a timely way. So I'm going to drop that link in again, and I'm going to go ahead and pass it back to Hannah and Marcy for the second piece here as we're moving through.
Okay, and as before I jump into this, one other thing that I wanted to flag is that by definition, this is new. So everything that we are presenting to you today is what we know right now. I had, the initial ask was kind of like, do you think that you know what the pain points might be, and do we have any workarounds that we could offer? And I have some anticipated pain points, which we can talk about as we go into the application. But I don't know the workarounds yet. I don't have the tips and tricks yet because it's new. So, one thing I think that would be really helpful for other advocacy, for kind of advocacy on this in the future, is as you are supporting people in filling out these applications, or are helping people or telling people about it, if there are pain points that you observe, or if there are trends and themes that you're hearing from people about challenges that they faced applying, or things they didn't understand, or issues they had with the call center, it's really helpful to get that feedback back to the coalition, the Working Families Tax Credit Coalition. I'm not sure Jody wants all of that, or Sarah, or Allison, or Tim. I'm not sure they want all that feedback, but if you could, you can send it to me, that's fine. But I do think, because this is new, we don't know all of those things yet. We don't, typically I know that Hannah and her team, when they've done these sort of trainings, are like, well, here's like sort of a thing that we've figured out really kind of helps smooth the way on this. We don't know those yet. And so this is an opportunity as well as when you're helping folks to really help us improve the process kind of on the administrative advocacy side, on the legislative advocacy side, but also in what do we tell people in the future? So that's my little kind of like not quite advocacy plug, but sort of help us shape future advocacy by letting us know how it's going. So this is what the paper application looks like. And, I'm not going to go through the whole application, but I do sort of want you just to see kind of what it looks like. If this form comes across your desk that or your email, since not that many of us are at desks these days. Well, more of us are, I suppose. So this is the paper application. You can see it's sort of a little bit standard fare, your name, your social or your ITIN, what that is. You can see that there's that checkbox for have you applied for an ITIN but not yet received it. So that is an option there to fill out. And then you really sort of see this like before you begin, it tells you as you're going through the application or before you go through the application. It's going to take about 30 minutes. You need to have met these qualifications, like what the income things are. So, theoretically, we worked really hard with DOR to try and get this in as plain language as possible. I'm not sure we got all the way to plain language. It is difficult to talk to tax accountants in plain language, is what I have learned over the last 6 months, 8 months, I guess. But really there's documentation for kind of your name, your income, how long you've been in the state, and then kind of the backing documentation is including that 1040 from your tax filing. So one thing that's nice about this is you do have to have a separate application, and they do ask you to fill out information, because what the Department of Revenue is looking for is not exactly the same as what the IRS is looking for, right? The IRS does not care whether you lived in Washington for the last 183 days or 183 days in 2022. The IRS doesn't care about that. So, but that is something that's required here to be eligible, right? You can't just move from state to state, accessing the credit or whatever crazy narrative that people at the state are worried about around fraud. Similarly, the IRS isn't really that interested in your age. They might be in terms of credits, but not in the same way that this is. So, but one thing that's nice is there is sort of this backing documentation with your IRS tax filing that I think does serve as, we said that you don't need to have photo ID, right? Which would be sort of another like validation and sort of proof of what you're saying here being accurate. And you do have the IRS 1040 documentation to go along with that. Again, I think we've covered this. These are the key deadlines and dates, right? So the outreach is now. It started in 2022. It is now. The application is live. We found out in the first day there were 10,000 applications, and as of late last week, in the first week, there was a little over 45. I want to say 47,000 applications coming in. So these are great numbers for the first week of this being live. So the outreach is working, but we need to keep it working. Most states, when they implement something like this, they have the best one we've seen is about 40% of people eligible, like accessing it in the first year. We really want to beat that. We think we can do better. That's why we're doing all these trainings. There's a lot of outreach happening, but we need your help to let people know about it. I've long said that any good law is only as good as somebody's ability to access it. And so we have to like let people know about it and how to access it. So it's live now, and people have until the 31st of December to apply. So again, they can file their taxes now during tax season. Maybe people would even realize that they're eligible for the EITC at that point. And then there's still or they've been on, maybe they're the person that Hannah described earlier, they filed right away, they just wanted to get it over with. But they didn't know about the Working Families Tax Credit, or it wasn't live yet when they filed their taxes. They have until December 31st to do so. Okay, so this is the as promised frequently asked questions. I have to tell you, when we originally developed this training with the coalition, the Tax Credit Coalition, we didn't have this frequently asked questions set. Or maybe we had 2 questions. And as we've done this training a few times, we've realized there are a lot of questions, and most of them have similar themes. So we're going to try and hit the kind of what are the main questions that people ask, and hopefully that doesn't mean you can't ask questions, but hopefully we'll just be able to get your big questions knocked out right away. So here we go. Hannah, do you want to get started with this one? I promise I'll take the weird income tax filing one.
Right, yes.
We can just take turns.
No, that's perfect. So a big question, of course, is, is my information safe, especially if maybe someone is an I-10 filer, or maybe needs to keep their information confidential for safety reasons. So yes, under Washington state law, the information of any children that are part of the application will not be shared with any other state or federal agency, including ICE. And ICE stands for U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. So that might be if someone is concerned about remaining in the state or immigration status, that's what ICE deals with. So the information will not be shared. It's considered a safe program to be able to apply for.
Related to that, will receiving the credit impact any opportunity to receive a visa or green card in the future? So this is really around that public charge conversation that we've been having over the last few years, particularly during the Trump administration. And the answer is no. Tax credits are not considered public benefits under U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services public charge rule. So, I know folks were concerned about Medicaid. I know folks were concerned about TANF and SNAP. Tax credits are not considered public benefits. They're considered tax credits. I think a lot of people got concerned about any time they get any sort of cash, it would count against them. And this is not the case here. We can have a separate conversation about continued advocacy needed around public charge and why that's unfair. But just wanting to be super clear at this moment that this does not count around public charge.
So this is another kind of frequently asked questions. Even as I was explaining the process, it was sounding confusing to my own head. So, absolutely makes sense. People want to know, is this credit automatic, or do I actually need to apply for it? And like we said, you do have to affirmatively file an application for the Working Families Tax Credit. And then again, you can apply directly through the Department of Revenue. We talked about the paper application, the online application. It could potentially be integrated when you're filing your taxes if you're using certain paid services. Oh, and that's actually what it just says. I should have just read this slide. If you do your taxes through a third-party tax preparer, they will most likely have the application integrated in their system, but again, it's not guaranteed. And then the DOR does have that. It says will confirm the list of paid preparers, but that actually is live on their website. So you can check that out if you have any questions.
Okay, this is my favorite one. Can claiming the Working Families Tax Credit impact benefits? No. It is a simple, clean answer. No, claiming tax credit does not affect any other benefits you might receive. I love the simplicity of this slide. It's just a simple no. No, 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 it does not impact benefits. So this is an easy one to share with community members. In my experiences, often a question like that is like, well, it's complicated. We should talk about this thing or this other thing or this thing or that thing. And the answer here is just no.
So is it free to apply? And the answer is also another great simple question. Yes, it is free to apply for the tax credit. if you're applying through the Department of Revenue directly, I do want to know, I think we talked about this earlier, some third-party tax preparers, so again, like H&R Block, they may charge applicants. So that's why we're really encouraging people to use the free tax prep services available to community members, if and when possible.
Okay, does it cost to apply for an I-10? It's free. So you'll notice that there's a trend here in this paid tax preparer thing, is paid tax preparers want to get paid, so they charge for things. I feel like it's a little bit like the airline experience, where it's sort of like, well, you can fly, but like, you're going to pay for your bag, you're going to pay for a drink of water, you're going to pay for an inch of extra space, you're going to pay for all of the things, right? So it is free to apply for an I-10. That's definitely where it diverges from my airline comparison. But tax preparers may charge to assist people. So, again, we always tell people to ask about fees up front. Don't get all the way through the I-10 process and find out that you have to pay for it when you maybe could take care of it for free. So always ask about fees. Not all tax preparers, from what I understand, charge to assist people, but some do. And so it's just better to ask up front if it's a free service or not.
So this is a question I teased earlier on, qualifying child. What does that actually mean? Because as we talked about for eligibility, if you don't have a qualifying child, if you're not claiming any children, you have the age requirements. If you do have a qualifying child, it doesn't matter what your age is. So how you know if you have a qualifying child is if you're able to claim your child on your taxes, then they are going to count as a qualifying child for the working tax credit. They must be under the age of 19 or in school up to age 24 or any age and have a disability. The child must also have a social security number or an I-10 in order for you to be able to claim them. So that's kind of the caveat around who counts as a qualifying child.
And I will just add on this is a place where I anticipate some complications for folks as they're applying. So, not every family is a 1 and 2 parent household who have the same parents for every child, right? There are a question I fielded from community members is sort of around like, well, I don't know, what if my ex claims and what about this? And, I do think that will be a pain point for people trying to figure it out, especially for people who don't always file their taxes because they don't have a requirement based on their income to file federal taxes. Again, we'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. But I do think to the extent possible, really trying to be on the same page with the non-custodial parent, or if there's shared custody, whatever your kind of custody plan and claiming on taxes would be, the person who's claiming the child on their federal taxes is who is eligible to claim that child on the working family's tax credit. So, I will say in my own family, when my parents split up, I'm an only child and my parents took turns claiming me on taxes, much to my mom's frustration. Which is neither here nor there, but it meant that under these circumstances, my parents would have also taken turns on receiving the working family's tax credit, sort of as an example of kind of what that looks like, that it doesn't always, these are not kind of stereotypical white picket fence families necessarily. And so really wanting to do everything we can to say to people up front, like, hey, do the best you can to know whether it's your turn to claim your child and kind of what that looks like. So just kind of I don't want to muddy the waters for folks, but I do want to say that this is a place where I anticipate being complicated, a set of complications for some families, and just something that you all should be aware of if you're helping people apply.
And actually, I just saw a question pop up in the chat that's related to this, so I figure I can just address it now. I think the question was, what are the rules for the children that's up to 24 and in school? What are the requirements as far as, I should just read the question. Are there specific school requirements for those up to the age of 24? So that is I don't know the tax code front and back, but it's the rules under the tax code to whether you can claim your child up to age 24. So if Marcy knows the exact, I'll let her take that over. But, you know, oftentimes with other benefits, it's things like if they are maybe in like they have a special needs at the school. So that's why they're, you know, still in school up to 24. I don't know the specifics under the tax code, but it's going to be whatever would allow them to qualify for you to claim them on your taxes. That's going to be the same rules for this purpose. Marcy, let me know if I butchered that.
Nope, that is correct. So, you know, if you're supporting your child as they go to college, maybe they're at a community college and still partially living at home or living nearby, or in some other way, you are still claiming them on your taxes. You're still eligible to claim them on your taxes. That would be something you could claim them here. You know, I know like sort of that example of like maybe somebody's going to college but living at home or taking classes. That would be sort of an example of if you're going to school, even like at a community college type situation, you could still be claimed by your parents. You know, and I think this is going to be a place where it looks different in every family about whether someone becomes, you know, like stops being a dependent when they go to school or whether they stay dependents with their parents. And I think that looks different in different families. Yeah, so but that actual like kind of wiggle room spot is partly also why we're looking at the changing the age from 18 and up, right? Because we know that there are like low income students who are not being claimed by their parents who would be eligible for this credit, even if they don't, you know, if they don't have children. So I think that's kind of this piece of why we're looking at the age expansion. You would still have to income qualify, but currently, if you're under 24 and now I'm saying it backwards. Okay, if you're under 24 and not claimed by your parents, you wouldn't be eligible, but your family would be eligible if you are going to school and under the age of 24. I think I said that right.
There's one other question in the chat that I think fits into a little bit of what you were talking around, a sticking point of who's claiming a qualifying child and maybe broader. Is there a situation where one would be required to pay back the tax credits?
Unfortunately, yes. This would be, this is again, some more future advocacy, although I would certainly want to broaden the conversation around overpayments to other benefits besides the working families tax credit. But yes, so this is a part where if you do make a mistake, and claim a child that you shouldn't have claimed, and they pay you and they shouldn't have paid you, they will ask for that money back. We pushed hard to say, you know, almost every time that this happens on the EITC, it's an error. We shouldn't be punishing them. That money's been spent. We shouldn't do that. We were not able to get that taken out administratively. And I think frankly, I think it's largely because most other benefits have a repayment requirement. And so I think it would be hard for the governor's office to say, okay, well, we won't make that happen on this benefit, but we will make it happen on every other benefit. We can agree with that or not agree with that, but I do, that is the sticking point, which is why, you know, trying on the front end to get as clear with people as possible about, you know, making sure that they know that they're supposed to be claiming their child, that they claimed them on the federal program or on their federal taxes, because we really, really don't want people to have to pay this back later. I wish I could tell you there's no repayment requirement, but I cannot.
Great. And I'm not seeing any other questions at this point, so I think we could probably move on to the next slide.
I can take this one hand. I don't remember where we are. I'm back and forth for this one. So you'll notice we're in King County. United Way of King County has a pretty great website about free tax prep. The United Ways in general are kind of the main points on the free tax prep sites. The UWKC website has a list of locations around. Many of the public libraries in the Seattle and King County region have tax prep sites. And they're doing great work. So I also know that there's members of the Tax Credit Coalition who are volunteering as tax preparers this year. And they said it's by far the most rewarding year they've ever helped people do taxes after spending so much time working on this. So United Way of King County has been a great resource, and they've been a really good partner through this. And we're excited at all of the training that they've done with their volunteers about helping people access the credit. So we're really trying to like steer people to those sites so that they A, don't have to pay, and B, they have somebody who's like highly trained on accessing the credit. Okay, here's the sticky question. The sticky question. I could not figure out how to simplify this on the slide, so we're going to talk through it. So do you have to pay your taxes? Well, we are paying our taxes all the time because we don't have a state income tax. So we're paying it anytime we go to the store. We are paying it in our rent or our mortgages, right? Maybe not directly in our rent, but we are helping the property owners pay their property taxes via rent when we have it. People are paying taxes. You don't have to pay federal income taxes necessarily in order to qualify for this credit. This is meant to be like a tax credit that is more or less a rebate for all the state sales tax, maybe not all, but for state sales taxes. So for people with lower incomes, many of them do not earn enough money to be required to pay federal income taxes. However, you have to file your taxes in order to qualify for the working families tax credit. So this is a question that's come to me multiple times from community members around like, I don't usually file my taxes. Like, am I going to, if I file my taxes this year, am I going to have to pay federal income taxes in order to receive the credit? And for most people at the income levels that we're talking about, most of them will still not have federal income taxes that they are required to pay at this point. Their incomes are generally, at these incomes levels, are generally going to be lower than what the federal government says has a tax burden, essentially. It's not my favorite phrase, but has a tax requirement. But they will still get access to the working families tax credit. So people are already paying their taxes, and they are unlikely to have a federal income tax payment requirement at these income levels. So again, like a tax preparer is going to be able to help that person on an individual basis in a way that I can't tell you the right answer because it's different for every single person. But many of these income levels do not have a federal income tax payment requirement. But you do have to file and say, this is how much I earned, which conceivably some folks could find out they're eligible for the EITC as well. I've heard this, well, I won't go down a rabbit hole on this, but I've heard that that's like a potential benefit for GBI down the line, is that people earn enough money to qualify for some of these tax credits, which they didn't before. So it's a little confusing. People are already paying their state taxes. So this doesn't mean that they will now have to pay a federal income tax, because we don't have an income tax in Washington. Filing your federal taxes does not mean you will necessarily have a federal income tax requirement to pay and still qualify for the working families tax credit. So again, I just want to be as clear as I possibly can, because this is confusing. Just because you file your federal taxes does not mean you will have a federal tax payment requirement. Many people are still below that income threshold.
Thank you.
Jody, did that help?
I think so.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. And thank you, Sarah, for throwing in the acronym for GBI, which is Guaranteed Basic Income. And then we do have a question in the chat says, is this tax national? And I might invite this person, if they're asking, is this tax credit national? I don't know if Marcy or Hannah, you'd like a little bit further.
Yeah, I was just wondering if like this tax is applicable to people in other states, or is this just Washington State specifically?
This tax credit is just Washington State specifically. Some other states have earned income tax credits, but they're structured a little bit differently. So this is only for people living in Washington.
One final question. So if someone was in another state, they would need to find out what those rules were for the earned tax credit?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. But it is an opportunity nationally. It's just structured differently.
No, it is not ever, states get to choose whether they have some sort of earned income tax credit. States get to choose what their tax codes look like. So I don't remember off the top of my head how many other states have an earned income tax credit. I want to say it's like 15 or 16. So it's not a requirement by the federal government that states do this. It's a thing that states can choose to do. So I know, for example, that we're the only state that does not have a state income tax that has an earned income tax credit program. So like Texas, Alaska, those states that don't have an income tax don't have something like the working families tax credit. We're the only one.
Do you know if by chance Georgia is one of those states?
I do not know off the top of my head. I would be happy to look it up though.
Oh, I would appreciate it. I have a cousin that she's a single mom with 3 kids, and I was just hoping this is something she can, inquire about when she does her taxes this year.
Okay, I will see what I can find out.
I appreciate you. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Wonderful. I'm not seeing anything else in the chat right now, so hand it back to y'all.
And I can take the next one. So what if you want to file your taxes by yourself? That is absolutely an option. If you want to self-file for free, again, there's another website, myfreetaxes.com. There's so many of these websites and they all have taxes in the title, but myfreetaxes.com. Again, you can self-file and then self-file your taxes, and then it's important to remember then it's a separate application to get the working taxes credit. And you show proof that you filed your taxes and provide a copy of the tax return.
Okay, see, clearly we're all about this. We're all about pushing for this. So you can file by yourselves, but what if you need help? So, again, the Volunteer Income Tax Assistance Program, it's free tax help, free tax return preparation for people generally making under $70,000 or less, people with disabilities, seniors, people with limited English proficiency. So there's sites available across the state. Again, in King County, the United Way of King County really leads that effort and have been a really good partner. It's probably why they're all up in this slide, as they've been a really great partner. And I think really bolstered the number of free tax prep sites from even like pre-pandemic levels in order to help people access the credit. So they've really expanded this year in hopes that they can get more people signed up.
This isn't, again, getting help, people free tax help so that they're not paying for tax help and then their tax credit is getting eaten away by that. So this is just some resources if somebody's not in King County. 211 is always a great resource. The IRS has on their website a list of free tax prep. And there are those volunteer income tax assistance programs throughout the state. So check those out if you're not in King County or you have community members outside of King County.
And that is all the information we have for you today. I mean, that's all the formal information we have for you today.
Thank you so much. This was incredible.